In this video, we're going to talk about the game structure underlying Trample and how you can deploy it to your advantage. Along the way, we'll talk about how it looks when combined with First and Double Strike, Deathtouch, and Protection. Let's start with the basics. What does Trample mean? Colloquially, Trample lets extra damage hit past blockers. What this means at a mechanical level is that if a trampling creature is blocked, it must assign at least lethal damage to each blocking creature in order. Then it can assign the rest to the defending player, planeswalker, or battle it's attacking. So now that we've covered the basics, let's look at a couple of examples of how Trample works on its own, and then combine it with other keywords. Our first scenario is very straightforward. You have a 6/6 creature with Trample, and your opponent only has a 1/1 blocker. The 1/1 is assigned 1 point of damage, which is enough to kill it. And because your creature has Trample, you can assign the remaining 5 points to the defending player. Our next scenario is a bit more complicated, but not by much. Your 6/6 is blocked by a 2/2 and a 3/3. You must assign at least 2 to the 2/2 and 3 to the 3/3. The last one can trample over to the defender. Let's make things a little spicier and run that last one back. Your 6/6 now has Deathtouch and Trample, and your opponent has the same blockers. What happens now? Deathtouch and Trample are one of the best keyword combinations in the game. Just 1 point of Deathtouch damage is all it takes to kill a creature. Or in other words, instead of having to assign lethal damage equal to a defending creature's toughness, you now only need to assign 1 point of Deathtouch damage. So now in our scenario, you can assign 1 point of damage to each blocker, and the remaining 4 go over to the defending player. Now let's look at how protection works when a defending creature has protection from one of the attacker's qualities. If you have a blocker with protection from the source that's attacking, then no damage will be marked on your creature due to the fact that it can't be damaged by creatures with whatever quality it has protection from. Let's suppose my 6/6 is a green creature, and you have a 3/3 with protection from green. Trample is the only keyword my creature has at the moment. Remember, when assigning combat damage, you must assign lethal to each blocker before any can go through to the defending player. Lethal for assignment is the blocker's toughness minus marked damage, and you ignore prevention like protection at this step. The punchline is that you must assign 3 to the 3/3, and you can assign the remaining 3 to the defending player. When damage is dealt, the 3 to the 3/3 is prevented by protection from green, and the 3 to the defender gets through. The blocker survives with no damage marked on it. What if we run the same scenario, but now we give my creature Deathtouch? Deathtouch makes 1 damage count as lethal for assignment. You can assign 1 to the 3/3 and 5 to the defender. When damage is dealt, the 1 to the 3/3 is prevented by protection from green, and the 5 to the defender gets through. The blocker still survives. Now let's turn our complication dial up a notch, and suppose that I have a 6/6 with First Strike and Trample, and my opponent has 3 3/3 creatures without any keywords or abilities. Let's suppose that they throw all of their creatures in front of mine in the Declare Blockers step. Because my creature has First Strike, the game has created an additional step ahead of the Combat Damage step, the First Strike Damage step. In this step, my creature deals its damage first. Assuming all 3 creatures are the same, it doesn't really matter which ones I choose to assign the damage to. 2 of their creatures die. Then we move to the regular Combat Damage step, where the remaining creature deals 3 damage to my creature. That's not enough to kill it, so it lives to see another combat. Now let's look at that same scenario again, and the only thing we'll change is that my creature has Double Strike instead of First Strike. We'll assume they throw all of their creatures in front of mine in the Declare Blockers step. Because my creature has First Strike, the game has created an additional step ahead of the Combat Damage step, the First Strike Damage step. This is exactly the same as last time. I assign lethal damage to 2 of the creatures, and then the defending player and I pass priority to move to the normal Combat Damage step. In this step, both of our creatures deal their damage to each other. My creature gets to deal its damage again because it has Double Strike, which just means that it assigns its damage once in the First Strike step, and again in the regular Combat Damage step. My creature takes 3 damage in this step, and this time, 3 damage tramples over to the defending player. We're going to hold everything the same and turn our complication dial up one more notch. Everything is the same as last time, but now my opponent has played an effect that gives all of their creatures indestructible. This is not going to be good for me. Again, we'll assume they throw all of their creatures in front of mine in the declare blockers step. When we move to first strike damage, my 6/6 deals 3 points of damage to 2 of the creatures. Because remember, you don't factor in indestructible or protection into lethal damage calculations. Now when we move to the regular combat step, I again assign lethal damage to 2 of their creatures. But because they're indestructible, it doesn't matter. Indestructible prevents dying to lethal damage. My creature takes a simultaneous 9 points of damage in return from the defending creatures, which is more than enough to kill it. Alright, now let's look at a couple of other ways that Trample can get tricky. We'll start with damage multipliers. Suppose I still have my 6/6 Trampler in play, and now I also have a Fiery Emancipation. This means that all of my damage is tripled. My opponent only has a 3/3 without any keywords or abilities in play. Let's see how this unfolds when I attack. This is one of the most counterintuitive parts of damage modifying effects. You might think that because my creature deals triple damage, I only need to assign 1 point of damage to the defending creature. But that's actually not the case. The key phrase you have to think about here is dealing damage. Emancipation triples the damage you deal, and when you're calculating what it would take to deal lethal damage, your creature hasn't yet dealt that damage. When looking at lethal damage assignment, you ignore damage modifiers and prevention effects, like we saw earlier when we talked about protection. What this means is that I still have to assign 3 points of damage to the defending creature, and then the rest can trample over to the defending player. When we move to damage, Emancipation modifies each damage event simultaneously. The 3 points of damage to the blocker becomes 9. The 3 to the defender becomes 9. The important thing to note here is that Emancipation triples the amounts after you've made those minimum assignments, not before. Now what if we run that same scenario again, but give my creature Deathtouch in addition to Trample? Now we're in a much better position to take advantage of Fiery Emancipation. Because Deathtouch only requires 1 point of damage be assigned to count as lethal, we can assign 1 point to the defending creature and the rest to the player. The damage modifying effect from Emancipation turns this into 3 damage to the creature and 15 to the defending player. There's one more edge case I want to cover before we close, and it has to do with blocking and how critical it is to be able to push damage through to the defending player when your creatures are blocked. In combat, a creature is considered blocked if it's been assigned a blocker in combat. Going back to our first example, let's suppose I have my 6/6 creature without Trample and my opponent has their 1/1 token. When my opponent declares their token as a blocker, my 6/6 is now considered a blocked creature by the game. It has been assigned a blocker in combat. And so here's how my opponent could get tricky and take advantage of what would be a straightforward death for their creature. What my opponent could do here is say, before damage, I'm going to sacrifice my token to Village Rites or to my Viscera Seer for extra value. And unfortunately for me, my creature is still considered blocked when we move to damage. It's counterintuitive for us, who can clearly see that there's nothing in front of my creature anymore. But the game doesn't see it that way. The game sees that my creature was assigned a blocker, and that's enough for it to be considered blocked when we move to the combat damage step. In this step, there's nothing for my creature to assign its damage to, and so nothing happens. The general principle here is blocked stays blocked. Once your creature has been assigned a blocker, it remains blocked for the rest of combat, even if every blocker is bounced, sacrificed, phased out, or destroyed before damage. When the combat damage step begins, a creature without Trample assigns no damage to the defender if no blockers remain. Let's run the previous example one more time, right up until the point that my opponent sacrifices their creature to cast Village Rites. Before that resolves, let's cast this wild size in my hand and give my creature an additional 2 power and toughness, plus Trample. This means that I've now got an 8/8 with Trample. This is bad for my opponent, who now has nothing standing in the way of my creature. When we move to the combat damage step, my creature assigns all of its damage to my opponent. As a general rule of thumb, if creatures attacking you don't have Trample, and you can sacrifice at instant speed, it's usually a win for you. Your blocker that would have died in combat is now turned into cards or value. and their giant hit becomes nothing. There's always more edge cases and nuances we could discuss. That's just how it goes when you have a card pool in the multiple tens of thousands. But understanding the basics and the most common edge cases will give you the foundation you need to navigate the other situations when they come up. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.